Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Dzień dobry.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to the second day of the 10th edition of Freedom Games. My name is Hanna Cichy. I'm going to moderate a panel on responsible business and unpredictable crises. I'm an analyst in Polityka Insight. Now with me are Maciej Nowicki, president of the Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights, Agata Czachórska, director for sustainable development, IKEA, Monika Kulik, a member of the board of the Responsible Business Forum, Marek, Tatała, the vice president of the board of the Foundation for Economic Freedom. I'd like to start with what we've seen over the past several years. We can mobilize very well in the face of cataclysm, and I think that all of you have personal experiences like that in providing help to the needy. Perhaps you have received some help from your close ones during the pandemic. And we also saw this huge aid provided to the Ukrainians after the Russian aggression. So I think that a lot of people individually think in these terms, what they can do, how they can help. But it's much more difficult to mobilize against creeping crises, long-term crises. It's difficult to identify the beginning of, like a climate crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a human rights crisis, a democracy crisis. So let's start with Mr. Nowicki. He came last, but last in, first out, as we say in business. How can we mobilize ourselves in the face of long-lasting, slow-moving crisis? Human rights are almost always in some sort of crisis somewhere in the world. How can we maintain our involvement? Very difficult question. think the question will be about how business reacts, but the Helsinki Foundation is an example of an organization that has had to face three major crises overlapping in time. The first one is the acute crisis of the rule of law in Poland, which has a major impact on the way we work. Our work is kind of strategic litigation. Also, when you see that a court orders, court rulings are not followed, then we lose our, let's say, our weapons. Another crisis is expanding totalitarian and authoritative tendencies in post-Soviet countries where we work. So attack on the civil society in Belarus and the crisis on the Polish-Belarus border. We wanted to apply legal help, but it is only now that humanitarian organizations are taking action, but initially they weren't there, so we co-funded a border group that is kind of replacing the state in the obligation to save human lives in the face of mass human rights violations. So you not only kind of step in for the state, but kind of act contrary to the state, because the state does not care for them. Well, indeed, of course it is the case. The state even went so far as to take people from hospitals and throw them out. In the past, it's not so much the case today. And the third huge crisis is a war in Ukraine and the need to help Ukrainian refugees. Of course, we have had to remodel our strategy. We need to make it very flexible, and we are building what we call, what is usually called a well-being, but we are against the use of this term because it's overused and it's of questionable origin. But what I mean is psychological help. People who find refugees in the forest, people who find bodies in the forest, who document war crimes in Ukraine, they have consistent supervision. I think that civil mobilization has happened in professional sectors. For example, we are being helped by psychologists, by a laboratory, pro publico bono. There is substantial intersectoral help. We need to do that, but it doesn't prevent a burnout and it doesn't prevent trauma. All we can do is decrease the consequences of trauma, but we cannot eliminate them. Now, another very, very fluid situation is strategic perspective. We planned 1,000 things, but we've done something completely different due to the crisis. And right now, we don't have a new strategy. New strategy will be developed along new lines after the elections, because the elections will show whether Poland has an opportunity to rebuild the rule of law or will still follow towards authoritarianism. So this strategic planning perspective is shorter. It's a permanent crisis management, and I think that many people were not expecting this. When we got a new management in 2011, we had a great strategy of achieving new goals, which has had to be reformulated. This doesn't mean that I'm proud of what we've managed to do on all of these, say, venues. So this crisis management is something that can be addressed by business. Now you have your own challenges like competition in the country, at the company level, also challenges related to climate and climate policy, and then you have March 2022. Now, what does a responsible business prioritize challenges? I think the previous speaker has already mentioned this. What is crucial for us is to follow the core, the anchor basis. This anchor is a vision for providing better living conditions for people, and we will never give up on that, irrespective of what's going on outside of our organization. And another thing that we are guided by on an everyday basis in crisis situations is our values. Our values dictate what we should do and what responsibility means for us. Now, one of our values is taking care of the planet and of the people. This is our backbone, so to speak, and our decisions are based on it. Of course, we add strategies on top of that, like sustainable development strategy that provides long-term goals, including those on reducing greenhouse emissions and positive influence on society along the value chain. So the circular economy, organizing well-being at home. These are strategic long-term goals, irrespective of the crises affecting our organization. We are obligated to accomplish those goals, and that is always the basis for decision making, in both economic decisions and business decisions. I need to emphasize that in these business and economic decisions, we always take into account people, workers, employees, local communities, just as it happened after February 24, 2022. I'll give you an example. The first decisions and actions that IKEA decided to implement is to provide some security to our workers who were in Ukraine, enable their return to Poland, provide some financial assistance to them, and provide security to their families. And soon afterwards, we started to provide aid to refugees. On the 26th of February, our store in Katowice conducted the first activity, equipping an old porcelain factory to provide room for refugees who escaped over the first 48 hours.
And what if these goals are mutually contradictory? Because this humanitarian aid in times of humanitarian crisis is obvious, and the decision that we have to help comes quite easily, but there are more difficult decisions that we have to stop buying oil from Russia, and these decisions often go against the business rationale of a company, at least in the short run. So how do you prioritize these challenges? I will repeat myself. Well, these are very difficult decisions, but our values are our anchor. So whenever we face a dilemma, we always listen to our values, and they tell us what decision we should take. And I can only recommend it to other businesses, to other companies, to be consistent and to stick to the backbone of your organization, to your organizational culture and organizational values. But also we should listen to our customers, but also to our staff. And I believe that our customers expect us to act responsibly at the climate level. Every second year we have climate action research, and the majority of people living in Poland tell us, business, you are responsible for acting, and it's also the responsibility of the governments. These are the two main actors on the social stage, of which the consumers expect some activity, and we take it seriously. We listen to these voices and we take action. I'm not saying that it's easy, but there is no other way out. We have our values, we have our goals. People with who work for us, they tell us clearly what they expect of us. And does the Forum of Responsible Business have similar experiences? When you started, you mapped the challenges, but then the waters got more stormy, and new challenges starting popping up from everywhere. I think that we can speak of two directions. On the one hand, we have strategic management with this crawling crises like climate change. But on the other hand, responsible business is a business that responds to social needs and responds to crisis situations such as the pandemic, for example. And these crises cannot be foreseen easily. They are often not very much likely, but when they come, when they materialize, we have to act through crisis management. But from the social responsibility of business, we need to prepare our company to be able to respond to crisis situations that may materialize within the several years or over a 10 years horizon. We spoke about our staff, but our barometer tells us that people expect that business as a stakeholder, which is whose agency is bigger, gets more engaged in solving social problems than other actors, even political actors. Well, of course, that needs systemic changes, but when we look at it in a wider perspective, we can see some regulations that are to encourage or even to force business to take account of climate change, for example. We are on the eve of the climate directive and sustainable growth directive or due diligence directive. They will be adopted soon and they will be binding. It all tells they all tell business that they have to get prepared to these different situations and to draft scenarios, has to respond to these risks, physical risks, but also demographic risks, which also are induced by climate changes. Also in the Green Deal and in other regulations related to climate, we can find the same regulations, and that may happen at the cost of human rights or social rights. So business must start thinking more broadly. We must think also about our supply chains, educate our suppliers, business partners, so that this responsible response to different situations gets as broad as possible. Because we are responsible for positive outcomes, but also we are responsible for moderation of negative outcomes. But speaking, for example, of changes and challenges related to the pandemic and the war in Ukraine, this is crisis management, and listening to NGOs, to their needs. We could see that very well during the pandemic. At the very start of the pandemic, we carried out a study and we learned from it that our employees expected the employer to ensure safety to them, to provide them with information how they should behave in a given situation. So social expectations and following the expectations of our staff and other stakeholders, I think this is the most important. Do you want to add something on that? Yes. Yes. We heard of risk management scenarios. That's very important, but when preparing to this panel, I reflected on the importance of noticing certain symptoms of unexpected situations and developing these management scenarios or business scenarios that are linked to crisis. And what's important is the diversity in the teams, because these diverse perspectives provided by different people can help us notice more symptoms than when we all think in a similar way. I think this is very important, especially in crisis situations. This is a very important aspect, and this is a value added of investing in diversity in companies. To responsibility and building and resilience building will come back for sure, but I'd like to come back to what is predictable and what is unpredictable. Well, in economics, we know that economic crisis is something that has been researched quite well. We have different indicators, early warning indicators. They work better or worse. Sometimes we disregard them, but we don't have anything like that in the area of the rule of law. So, Marek, what about your community, the people who you work with? Do you work on scenarios? What will happen with the rule of law crisis, free media, human rights crisis in Poland? If our hopes are not met. Thank you for this question. I'm not sure whether my answer will be precise enough, because the reality around us is unpredictable, so it's hard to draft such scenarios. But speaking of financial aspect or financial side, it's easier. There is not a one way of deciding that will be a financial crisis, but there are different indicators that can tell us that something will happen, that lies in bank activities, currency rates. There are many symptoms which can tell us that there is a financial crisis or economic crisis looming on the horizon. And also many of these have covered public finances, and we know the policies which lead to that. So, for example, loan stimulating policy, like as it happened in the United States. So we know what kind of public policy may potentially lead to crisis, and the question is how can we prevent it? When it comes to the rule of law crisis in Poland, I think that there were some signs, warning signs before 2015. There were some attempts of attacking the judiciary system between 2005-2007. So we had some idea of what politicians may think of subordinating courts to them. But if you allow me, I'd like to speak about this aid initiative, which shows the role of an individual and private businesses in this aid. So the first the first wave came with the pandemic. We could see press conferences or with big planes bringing face masks from China that was available on the public TV channel, while on other TV channels we could see small businesses, women sewing these masks. Public TV didn't disseminate this information, but they were boasting of what the state-owned companies are doing for them. For example, alcohol making companies, they switched to making disinfecting agents, disinfecting liquids, the change into remote work system. We all use these platforms. I think we have already forgotten about it. We can still remember the role of the state, which on the one hand prohibited a lot, while on the other hand it of course it produced some of the needed equipment, although not a single business initiated by the state started making masks for people. But we must remember that the private sector was very much engaged in the pandemic and they were engaged in it not only to make money. Okay, sometimes maybe that was the reason, but they were doing it to maintain jobs for their people. A meal for a doctor. There was also a campaign of Open Dialogue Foundations for Foundation. They were collecting money to buy food for physicians who were occupied with saving people's lives, and they were at the same time they were using this money to pay to restaurants which were closed down in the times of the pandemic. So they were in this way the restaurants were getting some money and the doctors were not hungry. So at the same happened we could see with Ukraine, and that fits very well a statement by Friedrich Hayek, Nobel laureate in economics, of spontaneous order. So on the one hand this was the grassroots movement, but on the other hand it was a very orderly movement. These people from the refugees from Ukraine, they were not ending up anywhere. They were brought to homes of private individuals or to collective accommodation centers. But many people were doing it very spontaneously. At the beginning of the war, I was approached by my friends from Canada in the IT business. They said that they had software developers, so maybe we could develop software linking the refugees with potential jobs. In the first days, we thought it would be necessary, but that was a process where we had a team, something had to be planned, IT people had to start working on it, and after 2 weeks of work, we decided, well, stop doing it, it doesn't make sense. People have got organized. There are local community groups, people are going to the border to take these refugees back to their municipalities to offer them accommodation and jobs. So that shows that this responsibility issue doesn't have to be linked with top-down regulations, orders, bans, but people are responsible by themselves. Sometimes they are motivated by the profit, but there is nothing wrong with it. I really respect a lot these people who were making these masks. I bought them myself, and I'm very happy that I could contribute to the revenue of the business, or maybe these people couldn't do the jobs that they were normally doing, and I could get these masks.
It's very good that you mentioned how the private sector, civil society enters these roles that are often ascribed to the state. I also remember in the weeks preceding the Russian aggression on Ukraine, it was kind of predictable to some extent. There are a lot of Russian soldiers on the border, and a lot of people were thinking about what would happen. And I was going through a crisis management strategy document prepared by the Polish state. And there were some procedures what to do when, in the case of a huge influx of refugees, building centers for refugees, involvement of local businesses, forcing them to provide spaces for refugees, of course, upon remuneration. But when the crisis indeed occurred, very few actions were implemented from that strategic plan. A lot of local initiatives stepped in. Local authorities, businesses, and so forth. It's in a forum of responsible business. We reviewed the responses of companies to the crisis, from services, products, providing their own training centers for the needs of refugees, like in my company, for instance. Humanitarian aid, convoys, and the collections, yes. Business was doing all that without any procedures. Several hours after the war breakout, people went to the border and distributed telephone cards free of charge. So procedures came later, but initially it was just acting upon your heart motive. It's still a crisis, even though social needs have changed. Now it's responding to clients from Ukraine, and the fact that our services, our news are also provided in Ukrainian. We have special offerings, we have communication, we have jobs. We have education. Also, the pandemic is a great example where many companies, also tech companies, have transitioned to digital education, providing education to teachers, providing connections and platforms for children despite the numerous problems. So business responds with all of its resources, both human resources, product resources, financial resources, cooperation with organizations, social organizations, because they are the closest to the problems. They can react most quickly, and they can best respond to local specific needs. If I may chip in, I couldn't agree more. All that you mentioned, Monika, we've done as well. I remember a very important decision in the first days after the aggression of February 24th, 2022, when we got this information that there's a global decision that IKEA Foundation, an Inca Group and Inter-IKEA Group would transfer a huge amount of money to crisis response, humanitarian aid. And I'd like to emphasize one thing. And this crisis in particular showed us certain systemic problems that we're facing in Poland in terms of accepting refugees. It's a wonderful when you look at this heartfelt inspiration for business and individuals, but what is even important is to continue this support, continue cooperation with NGOs and providing systemic programs for people with refugee experience. I'd like to mention other programs that we're very proud of, and we'd like to inspire other businesses with this example. Even before the invasion of February 24th, we started program Skills Count with the Foundation Ocalenie. It's a special program for refugees, helping them to enter the work market and remain there. In this program, in addition to an ability to gain experience with IKEA at work, we also provide language training, psychological help. Now, the basis for settling in a country or community is the ability to live in a dignified way, which is ensured by work. And I think this is crucial. So Marek mentioned Hayek and the Austrian school, and we're generally talking about positive examples of how business reacts to crisis. Of course, I'm very happy to hear that. I could provide more examples, but I'd like to observe that in light of international standards like UN guidelines for human rights in business, and also EU directives that have been mentioned here. Business is responsible for respecting human rights in a different way than the state, but also business is co-responsible for that. And responsible business is not a business that promotes philanthropy, but business that does not detract from human rights and that reacts to and counteracts human rights violations. And the complete deregulation promoted by the Austrian school seems to be criticized even by very hard defenders of liberalism, such as Francis Fukuyama, who observed that the deregulation of business institutions, financial institutions, caused a terrible damage to the environment and society. I'm not a supporter of statism, but a responsibility for business in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the air pollution, and workers' rights. These are the basic subjects that we should address when we talk about responsible business. Yes, I couldn't agree more. And speaking to the previous statements here, I believe that human rights should be about business respecting them, of course, and managing situations of violations, but a good practice with respect to human rights should contain an idea what you should do when the rights, the laws where business operates are contradictory to human rights. Yes, also when you have guidelines for a war in Ukraine, it's not about conflict. The neighboring countries have great responsibility about how they cooperate with their partners operating in areas covered by a conflict. Ukraine, for example, cannot protect its people in some areas. Then we should cooperate with local businesses and warn them that they could be responsible for violations of human rights, and the state should stop, for example, loan guarantees to such businesses that violate human rights or cooperate with authorities violating human rights. Is every business responsible, small or large? Of course, a large business somewhat to a greater extent due to proportionality, but especially state-run businesses. According to the binding law, a particular responsibility for respecting human rights and civil rights, that should be on state-run companies or companies with a substantial shareholding of the state. Yes, I'd like to indeed mention that the developers of the Austrian School of Economics were not for complete regulations. Hayek wrote a lot about business functioning within the rule of law and functioning within a good order. It's not the case that they opted for anarchy. They indeed emphasize that the business should operate within a certain legal framework, a minimum legal framework ensuring rule of law. In terms of environment, I think that the valuation of externalities is still faulty, and we should develop mechanisms to solve environmental problems, which was not done before. And I can see a lot of room for market regulation to include certain things in the price, and some things will be more expensive. They will not be covered by owners of companies and shareholders. We are going to pay more for certain products if we want to care for our environment.
I just want to add that the right to live in a clean environment has been added to the list of human rights. That's how climate conditions have been taken account of. And of course, the accomplishment of goals have to be covered by due diligence procedure, because they can't be achieved at the cost of human rights. Well, 2 words about Łódź. Well, I just wanted to refer to this short video that was presented before we started. I liked it very much, and I think that Łódź is a very good example of a place where many factory owners who built these structures, they also took care of the space. They took care of the sewage, water supply system, public services, providing accommodation to the workers. Even before we had the directives or UN regulations, because some business people at that time believed that it pays off when you have a healthy worker who drinks clean water and has a decent conditions to live. Remember that when ban on children work was introduced, and often capitalists are shown as those who used child labor, they were introduced and put in place already when business people decided that this child work doesn't pay off, that this is the time for children to learn, and that parents should work. And it was also at the time when the British society was becoming more and more affluent. And of course we can't speak of we can speak of banning child work in Africa, but it will still be there. The best way to stop child work in Africa is to offer these countries better growth possibilities, more secure environment, but which they don't have because there are lots of conflicts in the region. I don't want to give you a lecture on the history of economy. I will give the floor to the audience because I can see some of you raising hands, but well, so let's come back to the key issue, that is the responsibility. You've told us a lot about the responsibility vis-a-vis your staff, vis-a-vis external stakeholders, but when we look at the commercial code for companies, companies are responsible vis-a-vis their shareholders, in principle, well, first of all, and I can agree when it comes to the idea with Mr. Nowicki, but not to the reality, because the state-owned companies, they often accomplish goals and satisfy interests of some stakeholders, not necessarily, but definitely not minority stakeholders, because it's finally the consumer who will pay more for products, and so he or she will be able to buy less of products filled with values which are important or not to the consumers. So how about the responsibility vis-a-vis consumers? When it comes to stakeholders, there are stakeholders who invest in socially responsible businesses. But nevertheless, among traditional shareholders, we can hear questions about carbon footprint, social issues, workers' issues, and ESG, that's the language of investor instead of CSR. They want concrete numbers, indicators. They want to see how the company moderates climate-related risks or other social risks to carry out its business and make money not only for the 6 months to come, but in a longer time perspective, or how to prevent crisis situations linked to human rights, which may reduce the value of shares. So we can see that the shareholders are increasingly more interested, and the fact that non-financial reporting is becoming more and more financial, that we will be speaking of carbon footprint, impact upon local communities. To me, this is a good sign of change, that because it has become the part of the mainstream. But speaking of customers, of course, customers expect brands to be socially engaged. So there are more and more indicators telling us now these are declarations, but people declare that they want to buy products that are not harmful to the environment, which support social engagement. The transparency of the company is important. People want to know what proportion of the funds go for the different charity. People don't want greenwashing. They don't want companies pretending that they have become green. So we have a lot to do on the side of business to be transparent about when speaking about our products and services, but we can also see changes in consumers' opinions, and they clearly make these expectations. I fully agree with that. I think that great hopes are linked with going from CSR to ESG. So to show it financially in a longer time perspective, if that impacts the value of shares and profit and dividend, then this financial dimension of human rights and environmental impact may be reflected in the value of the company. So if the economic framework is to be sustainable, then this is where we should hope for business responsibility. 3 bullet points with reference to what we have just heard. Yes, this business responsibility is expected by consumers. I've already mentioned the studies which clearly show that. So that's in the interest of business to be responsible and to communicate in a transparent way, to be credible in what we do and what we declare. And here, by that I mean social washing or greenwashing, and the shifting of investment in ESG to consumers. It doesn't have to be that way, because firstly, investment in climate agenda or in circular economy business models, they are profitable in the long term. Energy use optimization, waste optimization, or design to avoid waste, they bring short-term financial benefits to businesses, and that doesn't mean that the cost will be increasing and that they will have to be shifted to consumers. I will tell you a short story from IKEA. Make it a short story because we are running out of time. So where has sustainable growth and development come from in IKEA? It has come from the wish to reduce prices at the very beginning. And we still do it through the less is more philosophy. So we optimize the use of materials on the one hand. On the other hand, flat parcel, which again helped us reduce the cost of delivery, and it had a positive environmental impact. Yes. Could you help me with the mic? So we'll start with the lady over there, and I'd like you please to be rather consistent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zuza Karcz of School Foundation. I very much wanted to ask the question. I'd like to address Agata and Maciej, because I can hear that you told us that these short-term actions like giving phone cards was management kind of activity. I don't agree with that because somebody had to, in your company, had to agree that you allocate some amounts to buy these phone cards and to give them to these people. So how these small processes, they built up knowledge in the organization. You know how many people have received these cards. What's your perspective of transferring these processes to other stakeholders, for example, to the state, for the state to work in line with the business? Because business has developed its private model, but this model can be translated into the state model. So how do these values, how are these values transferred into working processes? How can you translate them also to state-citizen relationship?
Odpowiedzi.
Maciek tries to avoid the answer. No, I'm joking. This is not an easy task because of what you have just said. This is a dialogue. And to have a dialogue, we need to have openness on both sides. For sharing our practices, good practices, processes. We use different associations that we are members of. For example, Leviathan Association. There are platforms which help us share our practices, and that's as much as I can say. Yes, yeah. You need to tango, and our experiences with big international NGOs, but also businesses. We were responsible for the protection area managed by UNHCR. We have withdrawn from this role because the state didn't take part in this discussions, and that was supposed to be a trialogue, and that's especially they are unwilling to do that, especially at the Belarusian border. We know now. Well, the next comment or question. Thank you. I've listened to that with great interest, and what I heard from your statements, I heard the emphasis put on COVID, that is pandemic, and our response to the war in Ukraine. I'd like to come back to the question asked by Hanna Cichy about this crawling crisis and to what you said, Maciej said about the rule of law crisis. I know that in Ukraine, around Ukraine, we had a lot of the need for a lot of social approval and a safe space for acting. So rule of law and going beyond the business strategy to go to places like to enter areas like media, rule of law. Can the business get engaged into it? What are your possibilities in this field? What are the limitations and ramifications? And have you got any practices? I'd like to ask this question to Monika. Well, I'm very happy that you have asked about it, because you asked about media. We Well, practically, when we speak, we are launching a campaign. We change the narrative. So it addresses, it targets representatives of the media and politicians, and its aim is to change the language when we speak about people, about refugees, about migrants, to change the language that we use to describe them. We carried out studies a month or 2 months ago to research the language in the public discourse, and we can see that the terms that are used can be very harmful to these people on the one hand, and on the other hand we know and we believe that the language that we use, the terms that we use, the words that we use shape our perception of a specific group or situation, and we decided that it's time for IKEA to speak up and to say, well, hold on, we should change this language of public discourse. So, and our partner, well, of course, we need a partner who is an expert in this field. So the Ocalenie Foundation, they are our partner. We have our stand in front of this room, and there is a QR code from which you can learn about this campaign, and there is this. The terms that should be used. Well, very briefly, I mentioned due diligence not by accident, because the company in risk management should take account of various aspects of human rights in infringement. For example, the freedom of speech, the impact of telecommunication services on the freedom of speech. But we have also workers' rights, children rights. So the companies should also offer activities to mitigate various risks. And currently we are carrying out a big study on the diversity in the creative industry. We want to see how the message is created by different creative agencies, how diversity is approached. During the previous panel, we spoke about it also, speaking about the rights, about human rights. So what kind of language is used, how we can approach these issues. So it's very difficult to encapsulate the subject of corporate responsibility and keep and limit it to 1 hour. I can see those of you who are disappointed because you haven't managed to ask a question, but we are with you. So please approach us and ask.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem, zajmowałam się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Dzień dobry, to znaczy myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co, ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty w urnie. Dobrze? To ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka? Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez PiS-u.